My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. On today's episode, I talk to Domille about phased battle maps, cartography, content creation, and much more. If you're interested in helping out the show, don't forget to like, comment, and share the episodes. Contact me if you or a DM you know would like to be on the show. Use any of the affiliate links in the show notes, or support me over on Patreon or buy me a coffee. And with that, let's jump into the episode. Welcome, everybody. Today I have Dom with me, who makes phased battle maps. Welcome, Dom.
Hello, how are you?
I am doing good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited.
Dom, why don't you tell us about how you got started in tabletop role-playing games and then about your phased battle maps?
Oh, buddy. So I started in tabletop RPGs back in 2014, I think. And I was originally interested in it because of World of Warcraft. I was really into it. And then my guildmaster mentioned it and I asked him about it, and the rest is history. And then so eventually I started DMing, and that was very scary at first and very strange to step into that hat and then put on that hat. And then eventually I actually was enjoying it so much that I started looking into creating my own Patreon. And when I lost my latest job and wasn't able to find a new one, I decided that, well, actually, it was my husband that was like, why don't you just start a Patreon with battle maps? And I did. And it took a long time for it to take off. And then eventually I came up with this concept of phased battle maps, which I don't believe existed before I did and before I came up with it. And so, I've been doing it with the phased battle maps for about coming up on 2 years now. So it's been really fun.
And what was it like getting started and with the Patreon and getting people kind of involved in supporting your work?
What was involved into getting started with Patreon and getting people to support my work?
Yes.
Oh,
That's kind of a broad question.
yeah, it's a lot. I knew that back when I first started my Patreon that it would be probably a lot of stuff that I didn't know and needed to learn about. And it was indeed a lot. Like, just making a good battle map in and of itself has involved so much learning since I started. And forget about all the other stuff, all the, marketing and running the business and, hiring people and, just all kinds of stuff. And so it's been a lot of failure that's involved into that, and learning a lot from that. And then eventually coming up with phase battle maps, something very unique, I think really helped.
And when you started, have you, I assume that you've made a lot of changes kind of to how you're been releasing these since you started 2 years ago?
Yeah, a ton actually. I've actually been doing my Patreon for 3.5 years. It's just that I've been doing face battle maps for roughly 2 years.
Okay.
So it's changed so much that so I have my full archive on my Patreon for ever since I started it, and because it's changed so much over the years, sometimes new patrons get confused, like, oh my goodness, why, sometimes posts are a certain way in the beginning and then they evolve as the years go by. And so yeah, it's changed a lot. I guess that kind of comes with the territory as you learn and change things around.
And to think of what other questions to ask about your phased battle maps. What do you use for inspiration when you're coming up with your next phased battle map?
I look at a lot of video games. The Initially, when I came up with phase battle maps, it was inspired by the World of Warcraft boss encounters, boss fights. I was always thinking about, I don't know, used to raid back in the day in World of Warcraft, and I really enjoyed how the fights evolved as you fought the boss. You know, there are different phases, and I always felt like D&D or TTRPG fight encounters are a little bit static, and can get even a little bit stale especially if you're going for a while. And so I kept comparing the two, and so eventually I came up with the way to evolve these encounters. And I already forgot what the original question was. Oh, is it the inspiration for phased
Yes.
battle
Yep.
maps? Okay. All right. So yeah, it was basically World of Warcraft boss fights
Sure. So
originally. But yeah, eventually, now I look at a lot of concept art, other video games, even movies, and recently I actually started looking at AI generated art, which is really interesting. Uh, so yeah, a lot of different media like that.
how many, when you're doing a map, how many kind of images are typically in a phased battle map? Do you always do the same number of kind of map pieces, or do you have varying amounts of images?
Um, they vary depending on the kind of scenario I'm thinking about. It can be anywhere from 3 to 15 phases in a set map. Usually it is around 5 or 6, but yeah, it can go either way, like 3, 4, or sometimes I will go as high as 12, 13. I don't think I've ever actually had a 15 phase battle maps, but I've done probably 12 or 13.
That's
So
still quite a large number of maps for just a single encounter.
yeah, it's a lot of work, and I've spoken to other cartographers in TTRPG, and they were like, "How are you doing all of that? That seems like a lot of work," and it is, but it's my job, so I can afford to do it.
And you're doing this full time now? Like this is your main job?
Yeah, it is. I've been doing it full time for a year and a half, I think, roughly.
That's awesome, living the dream.
Yeah, it's pretty great. Not gonna lie, knock on wood. I feel like I've gotten pretty lucky with that endeavor.
As a content creator, do you ever run into issues where you maybe feel like you're not sure what to do for your next project, or do you have just a ton of different projects that or ideas for maps that you want to do?
I have a running list of ideas, so sometimes my husband or I will come up with a cool idea for a future map and I will jot it down. But honestly, most of the time, I have a day before I start my next map where I sit down and I do a lot of research and I look at a lot of images and maybe watch some stuff, watch let's plays of video games, and see what inspires me that day. And then I'll come up with something that day for the next release. And it probably shouldn't be that way. I probably should plan things out a bit better than just coming up with stuff on the spot. But yeah, most of the time it's just kind of, the day before I actually start them up, I just sit down and come up with it. So
And about how long does it take you to put together a map, kind of start to finish?
roughly 25 to 40 hours or so for a single release. So that would include the base battle map as well as 3 to 5 variations that I've released on my Patreon.
Sure. Oh, do you do variations on a single battle map as well?
Yeah, so the way I do my releases usually is I release a free battle map available to the entire community. If they just want to grab it, they can. But then my patrons also get additional variations of the same map. So it could be, so for example, the last one I did was a battle map of a dark portal that lights up with lightning and crystals and stuff like that. But then there is a variation where that doesn't happen at all. And instead, there's a bunch of tentacles that come out of the water that surrounds the portal. So there's all kinds of additional scenarios that my patrons get access to.
And are those the variations? Are those just the static, kind of a static map then?
Oh
Or
no,
does
they're all phased battle maps. So
wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot of work.
It is a lot it is a lot of work, but it's worth it, and the people that use my maps, I usually get really good feedback from them, and sometimes every now and then I get to watch people use my maps on streams and stuff, and the expressions on people's faces when the phases change is just priceless. Because phase battle maps are still fairly unknown. Only, the DMs that are like, okay, I really want to do something really cool for my players, when they search for it, they find it. And players generally, I don't think, are aware that a map can change. And so when it does, they're just the expression on them, like, oh man, what is happening is just amazing. It's like the most fulfilling thing to watch.
Well, and then once they know, I assume that once they hit that first transition, then, big surprise. And then, okay, so then what's going to happen next? And now, because now I know that the map is going to change. Now I really got to think about how is the map going to change the rest of the way, right? Because this probably isn't, this is just the beginning of the changes.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then, and sometimes they don't well, not sometimes, but they don't know what's gonna happen, you know? The scenarios change and the terrain changes as they go. Maybe some holes show up under their feet and they fall into a deep dark hole and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at your Patreon and some of the different images that are just kind of out on the page. And a lot of these maps just look super cool and they look super detailed too from an artistic standpoint.
Yeah, thank you. I try. I try to always evolve my skills as an artist as well. Not just as, a DM and a battle map maker, but also as an artist. So I really try to convey a sense of atmosphere and storytelling in my maps.
And when you're making these maps, what kind of tools are you using to put these together?
I paint them in Photoshop, so it's just brushes and Photoshop. Every now and then I'll use a little bit of stock images or textures, but it's mostly painted.
Sure. So I mean, the maps are basically hand drawn. Then
Yeah.
that is really cool. These are some fantastic maps here.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about your phased battle maps at the moment?
Well, in addition to phased battle maps that I release on my Patreon, I also release encounters that are written by a professional writer. Not me. I am a bad writer. Even though I love DMing, I am not good at writing. And so it makes it easier to kind of wrap your head around, okay, well, how do I use this battle map? It seems like a cool concept. It's a phased battle map, it changes, but I don't really know how to bring it into my game. And the encounters serve that purpose to show you, okay, well, this is how you can integrate this map into your game. And they're just like plug and play, basically, encounters. Maybe your party's traveling and it's just a random encounter, or it could be a boss encounter, all kinds of stuff. So I think it just makes it easier for DMs.
Sure, just to have something, a little bit of an example of, how does this fit into, or how would you use this map?
Yeah, exactly.
And how many maps, do you know how many maps you have available?
So I used to count them and I lost count, I think, at around 80. And that was, I don't know, a year ago. So a lot. I have a lot. I have a very big archive of maps on my Patreon.
Yes, what's the frequency that you release these?
I normally release I actually okay, so there's several things that I release, but I normally release 4 paid releases, so 4 big new phased battle maps a month. Sometimes 3 if I decide that I want vacation, like a week of vacation. But then I also release about 4 encounters a month, at least 1 animated map a month. And I also release preset Foundry map modules for patrons as well.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so your patrons are getting quite a bit of content from you then fairly
Yeah.
regularly as well.
Yeah, I tried to keep it very regularly. Even sometimes I don't have something to release, mostly towards the beginning of the month because we're getting set up and I'm sending work to, my writer and whatnot. And it takes sometimes to get all the releases together. I still try to post and keep people updated about, what we're up to and whatnot. Because people like to hear from, they're paying literally paying me money for this, so I
Right.
feel like it's only fair to let them know what's going on.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So in your own games, how frequently do you end up using your own maps?
Unfortunately, not that frequently, and that's because I've been mostly DMing Call of Cthulhu for probably close to a year now. We only recently started playing D&D again. We had our first 2 sessions, and I'm not the DM in those games. So yeah, I haven't gotten to use my maps in a while, but I used to when I played when I ran a 5e game. I did use several. It's been a while since I've done one.
That makes sense. I haven't got a chance to play Call of Cthulhu. Is that typically theater of the mind, or is there different maps for that, or how does that game play out?
So we did play it mostly theater of the mind, and that's honestly because there is actually a severe lack of Call of Cthulhu battle maps out there. I think everybody is just kind of focused on D&D 5e or just D&D in general, fantasy themed battle maps, and there really is not a whole lot of, 1920s themed maps. Which I actually had an idea. I was thinking that maybe I should start a separate project with Call of Cthulhu themed maps only. But I am already so busy. Time is a commodity and I have very little of it. But maybe one day. So yeah, it's been mostly theater of the mind with just some atmospheric art as the background.
Sure. So theater of the mind mostly just out of necessity because there's just not a lot out there at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately. Maybe somebody will pick up on it, maybe somebody because there are so many cartographers out there. Maybe there will be a Call of Cthulhu-centric cartographer at some point.
I know I've been slowly starting to see more sci-fi based
Mhm.
maps, which has been
Yeah.
good.
Oh, yeah.
So there's definitely market for those kind of maps, and I would think Call of Cthulhu is, I think, decently popular anyways. So
Yeah.
see that being a decent market as well.
Yeah, I hope so. Or maybe one day I'll have enough time to get something going for that because I find that style and time fascinating. So I would be really excited to do something like that, just a matter of, finding the time for it.
So I think we can talk a little bit about a little more about your DMing and stuff. What do you have like a certain style that you do when you're DMing?
Yeah, I do. I think I've gotten to the point where I definitely do. And I really, really enjoy a lot of storytelling. We actually, as a group, my D&D group, or Call of Cthulhu TTRPG group, we generally veer towards a lot more storytelling and away from combat encounters. And I think that's been more, especially lately within the last several years.
To more storytelling, less combat.
Yeah. And I think that I try to create a very immersive world and games in general. So I try to engage them visually as well as have the atmospheric sounds and music and I make sure to do all the voices even though I'm not very good at them. I still try to voice all the NPCs differently, stuff like that. And try to keep the story cohesive. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And what's the right word? Where, things make sense.
You said you do like music and sound and stuff. What kind of
Mhm.
tools do you use for that?
I actually really like Foundry for that. I used to use Sirenscape, but with Sirenscape, you have to have like a separate app, and all of your players should have that separate app as well that you run. But since I started using Foundry, it has fairly decent sound controls. So I've been using that instead, and that way my players don't have to, keep track of that separate app and keep it updated and that.
Sure. Yeah, I have Foundry and I've only played with the sounds a little bit, but I know you can set like ambient sounds and set them in kind of like specific rooms with specific radiuses and stuff, which is kind of cool.
Oh yeah. And it's also really cool that if you are using not face, but just like any kinds of battle maps, the sounds can be directional on them. So the closer you get to the sound, the louder it gets, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, that definitely helps with that kind of immersive feel to your games. Do you tend to use, well, I guess you said for Call of Cthulhu, you don't tend to use a lot of battle maps. When you're running other systems, do you tend to use more battle maps, or do you still kind of focus more towards the storytelling versus the combat?
So here's the thing. I don't necessarily think that battle maps are for combat alone. So back when I used to run my D&D game, I actually used a ton of battle maps, but I used them for storytelling purposes, not necessarily combat. And I think that there is generally this preconceived notion that, oh, you see a battle map, there's going to be a fight here. And so I kind of had to train my brain as well as my players' brains out of that. That if you're on a battle map, that doesn't mean that there's going to be combat here necessarily. It's more just for the environment. And there are so many beautiful maps out there that convey, the mood and, whatever you want to tell your players through the map. And it's just like, why not? You know? And I tried to do the same with my own maps where you could just use them as a storytelling device.
So I agree with you that they don't always have to be for combat. And a lot of times I wish that I had a map for just about every location because I like to be able to kind of see where stuff is visually. And then it also can kind of let players wander around and interact with, or have a visual way to interact with things. Do you have suggestions on how other people could use battle maps in a more story driven way than just for combat?
Actually, so that's a good question. Um, I think that so sometimes I hear people say that, sometimes when battle maps have too much detail, that it maybe takes away from their game because players ask, oh, what is that thing? What is this thing? And, it's their opinion, that's fine. But I think that in my games, personally, if players do that, I take that as an opportunity to go ahead and come up with something on the spot about your world, about this location, if players are asking. And the fact that they are interested in something caught their eye is actually a really great thing. And, why not go ahead and come up with a reason why, that weird symbol is on the ground over there, stuff like that. But additionally, and this is not necessarily a storytelling thing, but in general, how to use battle maps and phased battle maps specifically. I know that on Foundry, phased battle maps can be clunky. And so we actually created Scene Phaser module that makes phased battle maps really, really easy to use on Foundry. So just kind of a sidestep, but I figured I'd, I'd bring it up.
Yeah, I thought when I was looking at the Patreon page that it said that there was a Foundry module that helped with those. Is there a certain tier that you have to be a part of to use that?
So I have a free scene phaser available that is just for the community. And then I also have premium scene phaser available that has more features, but then my patrons gain access to it.
Sure. So at least, at the very least, if you have just a couple of phase battle maps, there is a free way to access and use them in
Yep.
a little bit nicer way than Foundry supports natively.
Right, and it's also, you can use any phase battle maps, not just my battle maps with it. So it's pretty easy to configure other phase battle maps to be used in Scene Phaser. So yeah, you can use them literally. And there are several other creators who now well, actually only one that specializes in phase battle maps, but there's quite a few that have dabbled with and dip their toes into phase battle maps.
Cool. Yeah, actually, I am kind of talking to somebody else who is also doing phased battle maps, to possibly be coming on the show. So it's just kind of ironic that I'm getting kind of both of you at the same time.
Is it Balatro?
Yes.
Yeah, I know him. We're friends. He started phase battle maps. I don't remember, but sometime after I started them, and we eventually linked up. He is the only other dedicated phase battle map creator out there. So
Awesome. So, so this is a little bit of a plug for his episode that hasn't been recorded yet.
yeah.
And so he's the only other person that does specifically phased battle maps. How has, do you interact with a lot of the other kind of cartographers in the community?
Oh yeah, lots and lots. I like talking to other cartographers and creators. Being a creator it can be a little bit isolating, can feel a little bit lonely is not a good word, but I guess isolating because we're just working on our own. And talking to other creators can alleviate that. And so I do talk to a lot of them, and I'm friends with a lot of them. And I very much encourage other cartographers to pick up phase battle maps as well. And many of them have. Maybe they didn't switch to phase battle maps entirely, but they have released at least one phase battle maps here and there. So, and it's really cool to see, when the community picks up the idea like this. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I haven't gotten a chance to try one of these, but I really would like to do maybe like a one shot or something that makes use of one of these maps. Of your collection, do you have one or two that stand out maybe as favorites?
I have a lot. I actually really like the one that I just released. I think it came out really well. Then my very first real phased battle map was Old God Awakening. So it's Cthulhu coming up from the depths of an ocean. And it kind of blew up online and people really liked it, and I think to this day it has a lot of, even though my maps have evolved a lot since then, that one's still like, oh yeah, that's the one that really kind of kicked things off for me. So will always remain a favorite.
Speaking of, like kind of the first as you got started, how long, like what was kind of gotta figure out how I want to ask this. So like when you started your Patreon and you probably started to get a couple of patrons, how quickly did that audience grow? Did it take a while before it really kind of got to be big enough that you could do it full time, or was there kind of just like a really big growth when you had a couple of these maps do really well? What did that look like?
It took a long time, and it's still, I mean, I'm okay now, but I can't say that, that I'm where I want to be. Well, I mean, I am where I want to be. It's complicated, but no, it took a really long time. Specifically in the beginning, I wasn't full time, and so during that time was very, very slow. Because the more you release, the faster your Patreon grows. And I couldn't release a whole lot because I wasn't doing it full time. I couldn't pay as much attention to it as I should have been. That's actually one of my biggest regrets, is that I didn't go full time earlier. I didn't go full time until like a year and a half after I started my Patreon. And even when I did go full time, it still took probably another 6 months at least to get to where my income was okay, like where it could cover my bills and stuff like that.
Sure.
So it took a long time. For some people, Patreon, they start and their Patreon just explodes. It doesn't happen very often, but I've definitely seen that happen with other people, and that was not the case with me at all. It took a long time, and I'm still learning and growing, and I'm still hoping to be bigger eventually, and kind of influence the industry a bit more. Hopefully, phased battle maps will become more mainstream at some point. Knock on wood.
Yeah, well, you've definitely got a lot of them out there already, which is awesome. I know I definitely kind of struggle with that full-time, part-time thing because the podcast for me is just a little hobby thing that I do right now. So whenever like we get busy or stuff happens at work, it's like the podcast is the first thing that gets pushed, because I'm not making any money from it. So just gotta wait. But I've also kind of noticed the same thing, is the more episodes I do, the more of a backlog I have, the more people are listening each week, and the more people I have on my server and interact with me on social media and stuff. So definitely a grind.
Yeah, and it's so hard to juggle when you have, a full-time job and you're trying to get this thing going and pick it up, and where maybe eventually you can switch to it. It's the hardest time. It's really rough, but one of the creators I was talking to a while ago said that if you want to go full time, then you need to go. Basically, if you want to be full time, you need to go full time almost. But it's also very risky and hard thing to do. So it's rough. It's difficult.
The life of content creators.
Yeah, yeah. It's not easy.
Would you like to talk about how you prep for like game sessions and stuff?
Oh yeah, sure. We can talk about that.
So, and this can be any of the systems that you run, Call of Cthulhu or D&D or whatever. Just what does your prep look like when you're getting ready for a session?
Lots of searching for the right type of music and sounds. Recently, I started using one shots, so it's not just a continuous, sound in the background. But I noticed, I was watching Critical Role, and Matt Mercer does a lot of kind of sound bits with his own mouth, and I can't do that, but I realized how much that adds to the atmosphere of the game. And so I was like, okay, well, I can't do that, but there's all kinds of noises I can find online and just use that. And so I started doing that, and I feel like it really elevated my game by a lot, but it also adds to the prep time quite a bit. So yeah, I spend a lot of time looking for the right music, the right atmosphere, the right sounds. I look for background art that can now be generated by AI and is very crazy and weird, but also kind of awesome. And then of course the story. What do I think players are gonna want to do this session, and how can I prepare for it? And sometimes they do something I totally didn't expect, and then I just have to roll with the punches. But at least get something prepared, get a list of names that I can use for NPCs that they meet. Maybe look up some random encounters that I can use if I really need to, or if I, just to throw something in. But I also try to, with the last D&D game that I wrote, I tried to make something important or interesting happen every single session. So that every single session somehow progress their story or whatever their personal goal or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to handle sessions is to have some kind of a major, I want to say story beat, but it, like you said, it might not be necessarily like the main story that's progressing. It could be like a side story or something for one of the characters. But I think having kind of a concrete piece is good, do you tend to kind of build, like, pick something that you want to be the main focus and then plan the session around that piece?
No, I think more about mostly what do I think my players are going to want to do, and then plan around that. I mean, I usually have before we start our campaigns, I will have a very rough idea of the overarching story that I want to tell. And some sessions that would be, around that. But then some sessions are not. Yeah, it's just mostly what my players want to do.
So it's more so you're looking at what the players are, what kind of direction they're headed in, and
Hmm.
then you find something either from the story or from the characters that you think is important, and you kind of sprinkle that on top as just to make it a little bit more impactful.
Yeah, exactly. Hmm.
So when you're running games like that, would you say that your games are more of like a sandbox then, where the players can kind of influence anything? Or I guess you also mentioned that you have kind of a main idea for a story that you want to tell. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a combination of both. So not railroady where there's only one thing that they can do, one direction. And also not that they're just running around aimlessly, just trying to come up with something to do. Yeah, there's a major overarching story, but also the players heavily impact the world that they're in. I think that's part of why TTRPGs are so awesome in that players can feel like they are playing in this living world that is changing and their choices do make an impact, and even the smallest of choices, when I play D&D as a player, I give a lot of my wealth away which my party is normally not super happy about, but it makes me feel good. I feel like, oh, there's a person that could really use some gold right now and it could make a huge difference in their life. And I give them gold and then maybe next time we're passing by they have a nicer house or something, So it's like even in these small little ways, I think it's important to let them know that they can affect this world and they can make a change.
Right, and their decisions have consequences and they matter. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Do you have advice for new dungeon masters?
Sure. I think that my maybe biggest advice would be not to be afraid to feel silly and kind of not take yourself very seriously, and if you want to voice a character with a weird voice, then go for it. They're gonna sound silly, but that's okay.
That's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of is. It's fun.
But I totally understand because I get nervous doing voices as well. So when you're in the hot seat, it can be nerve wracking.
Yeah, I remember, my first times when I was trying to do voices and I felt so silly and just so self-conscious. And it was so hard to maintain the same type of voice for any extended period of time that I almost gave up. And I was like, it's not for me. I can't do it. But it turns out the more you do it, the easier it gets. And at this point, I really don't have a problem with it at all. I can't say I'm good at it still. I am still very silly and far from, being great, but it's fun and I don't feel so awkward anymore at all, actually.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but how long have you been running games for?
About 5 years, I think, as a DM. I've been playing longer than that, but running games, I think roughly about 5 years.
Okay. Have you had any sessions where you made like a big mistake as a DM that you remember?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I still can't. My players still won't let it go. It's been years since it happened. So we had a character in the group named Felrug, was the favorite of everybody, and I killed him. And I killed him because I forgot to roll to recharge Dragon's Breath,
Oh
and I
no.
just yeah, and I kept rolling Dragon's Breath, and it eventually killed him. And, yeah, that was a that was a very big mistake. Still get reminded of it every now and then. It's been a long time. It's been like several years since it happened. It still lives in the back of my brain.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. This dragon can breathe fire every round.
Yep. Yeah, literally just got a message from my husband, who was one of the player, that says, "You monster." He can hear me talk, so
That's awesome. So be
yeah.
careful. Do you tend to kill players often or no?
No, God, I try to, especially after that. I try to avoid it as much as I can. Yeah, especially, since our group focuses on narrative, we kind of avoid deaths overall. So no, I'm not the I'm gonna murder you type of DM.
You're not out to get the players unless it's on accident.
Yeah, pretty much, unless I forget to recharge the dragon breath, you know how it goes.
Do you use any house rules at all? I guess that's kind of dependent on system, but
For Call of Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu is very good at explaining the rules and just this. I actually really, really like the system itself. And they have some alternative rules, I think, in the books that you can use. And I think we may have used a couple of those, although I no longer remember what they are. Well, for D&D, we definitely use house rules. But since it's been a while since I DM D&D, I don't remember what they were, but my DM that is DMing us now, he actually introduced different rules for inspiration. And I think it's something like anytime we willingly take disadvantage on a roll for RP purposes, we get inspiration or something along those lines.
sure.
Which storytelling, anytime that we use something to help with storytelling, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know there are other systems that kind of bake that into their rules as well,
Hmm.
or something where you do something that's maybe detrimental to your character but makes sense to your character, then you get either rewarded with experience or some type of an inspiration or bonus or something.
Yeah. Hmm.
Cool. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about specifically for just kind of DMing in general?
Or DMing in general, can't think of anything.
That's all right. So you want to jump into this little lightning round, I don't know, encounter creator? I'm gonna give it a
Oh, buddy. Okay. Oh gosh, there's gonna be
Do you happen to have a set of dice by you?
you will have a set of dice. I do. Let me put them in my desk. Or, yep.
All right. So I'm gonna need basically a series of D12 rolls, and I'll just kind of ask for them one at a time, and we'll kind of figure out what this encounter is about, and then we'll just kind of improv it and see what we can come up with. Maybe it'll be a new map idea for you.
Okay. Right.
So give me your first D12 roll.
Okay, which one's D12? I haven't played with real dice in so long because we always play online. Okay, I got the D12. So first D12 roll, 11.
11. So we have a structure of some sort.
Okay.
Let's roll again.
Okay. That would be a 1.
One
Oh, no,
is
that's a 7, sorry.
7. 7 is some type of a town, or steading is the technical term. All right, so then let's roll one more d12 and we will see basically how large the town is.
3.
3. So this is a village.
Okay.
Let's see. If the village is part of a kingdom or an empire, choose one or roll. Let's roll one more d12.
Okay. 1.
1. So it has natural defenses. So that's kind of just a piece of it. It's naturally defensible. And then let's roll on. There's an oddity table here somewhere. Let's see what's weird about the town. Why don't you roll another d12?
Okay. 12.
And then I have to find my list here. Oddity. You roll the 12. Oh, you get to roll twice on the same table.
Do I roll again?
Yes.
Okay. 8.
8. So there's a volcano, or explosives, and then roll one more time.
Okay. 9.
9, and which is also, so there's also magnetic or repellent are the two things. So we have, so like in total, we have a small village that has some natural defenses, and then the weird thing about it is it's got some either volcanic activity or explosive activity, and there's also strong magnetism or something that's repelling things from this place.
Okay.
Is there anything coming to mind? I could almost already see like a battle map like
Oh
this.
yeah, I can definitely think of scenarios here. Yep.
So what are you thinking? What would make sense for an encounter at this type of location?
So what I'm thinking is there's a village at the top of a hill, with maybe a river running down on the side and maybe behind the hill where the village is located. And the village maybe has been known throughout this area for having people that are very, very kind and giving, and there's never anything bad happens in this village. And maybe there is even a saying that goes around this area, maybe village, I don't know, name, village, village of I'm bad with names. Oh, village. This village. If nothing bad happens here, or something along the line. That's a very bad saying. I'm panicking. Village of Borteth. There you go. My husband comes to the rescue with a name. And little do people know that the village has a secret as to why it is known for something like that. And that secret is that there's actually deep, deep, deep under the village, there is some volcanic activity. And because of maybe either magical means or there's some sort of material that is down there when it comes in contact with the heat, evaporates some sort of, I don't know, vapors that make the villagers actually turn to monsters at night. But during the day, it prevents like that's how they get rid of their anger and bad feelings or something. During the day, they're actually like super nice because of that. I don't know.
Nice. So we've got, that'd be kind of scary actually. You're in this town and then everybody just like turns into demons or something at night, and just everything, all hell breaks loose essentially at night. Or
Yeah, like maybe like it traps people inside so that nobody can say anything bad about the place anymore, you know. Maybe they turn into shadows at night, not monsters, and then they trap other people that come in. They can no longer leave.
so that description reminds me of Spirited Away. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah, that's one of my
Where
favorites.
she goes up kind of into that area, and then all the spirits kind of like show up and they're busy, but then she kind of gets stuck there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that movie.
So maybe something kind of like that. And then maybe there's some, like if the players spend too long there or something, then they find it difficult to leave until they've resolved something. Either
Yeah.
dealt with this magical entity or material or whatever it is underground.
Yeah, that could be interesting maybe.
Cool. Any other thoughts you have for this little encounter?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, thanks for indulging me and playing with my little random table experiment here. This is only the second time that I've done it, so I'm still working out the kinks myself.
All right, cool. That was actually kind of fun. Really fun.
If you are interested, this tables that I'm rolling on are from a supplement called Perilous Wilds. Specifically, it was for Dungeon World, but it's just random tables, so you can use it for pretty much anything. And you can actually find them online on one of the wiki pages. I can send you the link if you want to mess around with it. But yeah, so that's where that's from. Fun little experiment to see how other DMs' brains work when they're trying to come up with an encounter. So
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for doing that.
yeah. And with that, I think we can wrap up the episode. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me about tabletop role-playing games and your phased battle maps.
Oh, thank you for having me. Very happy.
And why not, before we leave, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you online?
My Patreon is patreon.com/DWW. Very quick and simple and short. I am on Twitter at Domille W. I have Instagram, Pinterest, all kinds of things, but you can find all of those things through my Patreon.
And for your listeners out there, I will be including the links to those pages in the show notes, so you can always check the links out there. And with that, again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.